What happens when one of hip-hop's most laid-back legends finally loses his cool on live television? Today, we're breaking down the moment Snoop Dogg walked off today with Jenna and Jet, friends, after a conversation went completely sideways. If you want more breakdowns like this, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me what you think really happened here. The interview started smoothly enough. Snoop walked onto the set with that unmistakable calm energy, smile, relaxed posture, greeting Jenna and the co-hosts with handshakes and nods. The audience was buzzing. Phones were up. Everything about it felt like another light, feel-good morning show appearance. And why wouldn't it? Snoop has done hundreds of interviews over his 3-decade career. No one expected what came next. Jenna opened with the usual warm-up, thanking him for coming, shouting out his latest business ventures, teasing new music. Snoop cracked jokes, talked about family, his grandkids, and his focus on building generational wealth. Classic Snoop, real grounded and easygoing. Then Jenna shifted gears. She brought up a controversy that had been circulating online for weeks. Comments Snoop had made on a podcast about the current state of hip-hop and how younger artists approach the game. Now, Snoop has never been shy about his opinions, but the way the question was framed changed the temperature instantly. Jenna asked if he thought he was being too critical of younger artists, noting that some people online were calling him out of touch. It felt less like curiosity and more like a charge. You could see it on Snoop's sixth. Relaxed smile tightened, just slightly. He took a breath and answered calmly, saying he's never been against younger artists. He was simply pointing out that the culture has changed. Dan, that not all change is automatically good. Jenna nodded, then pressed harder. She mentioned specific artists who had allegedly taken shots at Snoop online after his comments. Then, she asked if he felt he owed them an apology. That's when the mood shifted. Snoop leaned back, choosing his words carefully. He said he didn't owe anyone an apology for speaking honestly about the industry. If people were offended by his observations, that was their issue, not his. One of the co-hosts tried to lighten the moment with a joke about generational differences. Jenna didn't let it go. She circled back, asking whether Snoop understood why younger artists might feel disrespected by someone of his stature. Criticizing them publicly, she emphasized the word disrespected. That flipped the switch. Snoop sat up straighter. His tone changed. He reminded her he's been in the game since before many of these artists were born, and that respect goes both ways. He said he's always shown love to artists who put in real work, but he's not going to pretend everything that's popular is automatically great. He explained that when he was coming up, legends checked younger artists, and that's how you learned how you got better. Today's culture is too soft, said too sensitive. Everybody wants praise without putting in the work. Jenna pushed back. She suggested the problem wasn't sensitivity, that older figures like Snoop don't fully understand how different the landscape is now. She talked about social media pressure, mental health, and how public criticism from someone like him can seriously impact careers and well-being. She asked if he'd ever considered how much weight his words carry and whether he should be more careful with his platform. The studio went silent. What had started as a casual morning interview had turned into a full-blown standoff. Snoop's jaw clenched. He said he spent over 30 years using his platform to uplift his community, support young talent, and build opportunities for people who look like him. And he wasn't about to be lectured on responsibility by someone who didn't come from his culture or fight the battles he fought just to have a voice. Jenna didn't back down. She said, understanding the culture doesn't give anyone a free pass to tear others down. That being a legend doesn't mean you're above accountability. She mentioned that several artists had publicly said they lost respect for Snoop after his comments. Then she asked him directly he cared. Snoop stared at her. The tension was thick enough to cut. When he finally spoke, his voice was combat, ice cold. He said he's earned every ounce of respect he has, and if someone withdraws their respect over an honest opinion, then they never truly respected him in the first place. Respect isn't something you demand, he said. It's something you earn. And two, many people today confuse popularity With respect, another co-host tried to redirect the conversation towards Snoop's business ventures, but Jenna kept pushing, and that's when everything finally broke. Jenna asked Snoop whether his attitude might be part of the reason hip-hop feels so divided right now. There's such a visible gap between the old guard and the new school. She suggested that if veterans like him were more supportive and less critical, the culture might be more unified. That was the breaking point. Snoop let out a short laugh empty of humor. He told Jenna she clearly hadn't done her homework, because if she had, she'd know exactly how many younger artists he's collaborated with, mentored, and put on over the years. He started listing names, projects, specific moments where he opened doors and gave real opportunities. The difference, he said, is I support talent and authenticity, clout chasers and industry plants. Jenna fired back immediately, saying that labeling artists as industry plants was exactly the kind of dismissive language that fuels division. She argued that not everyone follows the same path to success and that gatekeeping what counts as real hip-hop is toxic. She told him flat out that his generation's way of doing things isn't the Actun valid way, and that maybe it's time for legends to step back and let the new generation define the culture for themselves. Snoop's expression went cold. He asked Jenna how long she'd been covering hip-hop. She hesitated, then said she'd been a fan for years and had interviewed plenty of artists. Snoop leaned in. No, he said, how long have you been in the culture? Not as a journalist, as someone who actually understands it from the inside. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Clearly uncomfortable, Jenna tried to pivot. She said, you don't have to be from the culture to recognize problematic behavior. As a journalist, she explained, her job is to ask hard questions and hold people accountably, no matter how legendary they are. She reminded him that being a legend doesn't put him above criticism. Snoop nodded, slowly. Then he asked if she brought that same energy to every guest or if he was being singled out. He pointed out how comfortable she seemed questioning his character and his contributions, and wondered aloud whether she'd challenge a pop star or a rock icon. The same way about their genre. The implication was unmistakable. The studio grew painfully awkward. Jenna insisted it wasn't personal, it was professional. She said her questions reflected real concerns voiced by real people in the hip-hop community. Snoop countered that hip-hop isn't a monolith and that a handful of loud opinions online don't speak for an entire culture. The back and forth dragged, unaccountability versus authenticity, evolution versus earned respect. The other co-hosts sat frozen, unsure how to step in without making things worse. The audience, phones still raised, knew they were witnessing one of the most uncomfortable moments a morning show had seen in years. Then, Jenna crossed the line. She suggested that Snoop's resistance to change might have less to do with protecting hip-hop and more to do with protecting his own relevance, that sometimes legends cling to the past because they're afraid of becoming obsolete in the present. The words landed like a slap. The studio somehow got even quieter. Snoop didn't look angry. He looked stunned. He stared at Jenna for a long moment, as if replaying the sentence in his head to make sure he'd heard it right. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, when he spoke. His voice was low and deliberate. In over 30 years of interviews, Sacris, every format, every country said, no one had ever questioned his relevance to his face like that. Not once. And it wasn't just disrespectful to him, was disrespectful to everything he built and to everyone who came up alongside him. He reminded her that he sold millions of records, built multiple successful businesses, crossed into mainstream media in ways most rappers never get the chance to. And through it all, he stayed true to who he was. Then he looked straight at her and asked, what part of that looks obsolete to you? To her credit or her detriment, depending on how you see it. Jenna didn't back down. She clarified that she wasn't calling Snoop obsolete. What she was saying, she explained, was that his repeated criticism of younger artists sounded like fear. Fear of a changing landscape. She argued that when established figures constantly take shots at the next generation, it often comes from insecurity about their own place in the present. Evolution, she said, is natural. Resisting it doesn't. Protect a legacy makes you look out of touch no matter what you've accomplished in the past. Snoop laughed. A guy. The same dry, humorless laugh. He told Jenna she was doing a lot of armchair psychology for someone who didn't know him, that she'd walked into the interview with a narrative already locked in and everything he said was being filtered through it. He accused her of not actually listening, just waiting for her next opening to push an agenda. One of the CO hosts finally jumped in, trying to cool things down. They suggested maybe both sides had valid points, that the conversation had simply gotten heated. Maybe it was time to pivot, talk about Snoop's impact on the community, his upcoming projects, something safer, but neither of them was finished. Jenna said if Snoop felt attacked, maybe that was worth examining. Sometimes, she suggested, defensiveness is a sign that criticism has landed closer to the truth than someone wants to admit. Growth requires self-reflection. She said even legends miss the mark, and accountability is part of evolving. Snoop didn't hesitate. He told her she was confusing defensiveness with self-respect. There's a difference, he said, between being open to critique and letting someone disrespect you on their own platform while pretending it's for your benefit. He came on the show in good faith, expecting a conversation, not an ambush dressed up as journalism. Jenna pushed back. This wasn't an ambush, she said. These were fair questions based on things he'd said publicly. If you're going to make bold claims about the state of hip-hop, you should be prepared to defend them. That, she insisted, real journalism, not lobbing softballs to keep guests comfortable. Snoop fired right back. Hard questions and disrespect aren't the same thing, he said. A real journalist knows how to challenge someone without insulting them, how to probe without crossing lines, and in his view, she'd crossed several. What she was doing, he told her, had less to do with journalism and more to do with chasing a viral moment at his expense. The accusation hung heavy in the studio. Jenna's face flushed. She denied it immediately. Everything she'd asked was relevant, she said, newsworthy, and if Snoop couldn't handle being questioned about his own public statements, maybe he shouldn't make them. Accountability matters. Being a legend doesn't exempt you from it. That's when Snoop stood up, not suddenly, not theatrically. Deliberately, he adjusted his jacket and looked directly at her. He said he's been accountable his entire career to his family, his community, his fans, and himself. He's owned his mistakes. He's grown in public. He's never claimed perfection. But what he will not do, what he has never done, is sit somewhere and let someone question his integrity and his contributions based on a shallow understanding of a culture they stand outside of. Jenna stood up too, matching his energy. She said she wasn't outside the culture. Hip-hop, she argued, is global now, universal. It belongs to everyone who loves it, not just the people who came up in it. Gatekeeping. Who gets to speak on it, she said, is exactly why there's so much division, and Snoop's attitude was a perfect example. Snoop shook his head, slowly. There's a difference, he said, between loving something and understanding it, between being a fan and being part of its fabric. Hip-hop was born from specific struggles, specific communities, specific lived experiences. Anyone can appreciate it, but not everyone gets to redefine it or rewrite its values to suit their comfort. Jenna shot back that cultures evolve, that clinging to some mythical frozen version of authentic hip-hop is limiting and regressive. Today's artists, she said, are living their own realities, creating their own truth, and their hip-hop is just as valid as his generation's ever was. Maybe, she added, instead of criticizing that evolution, he should celebrate the fact that the culture he helped build has grown beyond its original boundaries. Snoop didn't flinch. Evolution doesn't mean abandoning the principles that made something great in the first place. He said, there's a difference between growth and dilution, between expanding and losing yourself. Ruby kiss, ruby kiss, ruby kiss, only ruby kiss. Only ruby kiss has the luxurious texture that Keely to serve and leave you sell. My Melius you sell like buck death. My molestic nuss. Identity. Snoop told Jenna that when everything becomes hip-hop, nothing is hip-hop, that standards and accountability inside the culture aren't gatekeeping there. Preservation. The argument had turned philosophical, but beneath it ran something sharper, more personal. This was no longer just about music or generations. It was about respect, about boundaries, about who gets to speak and how those conversations are supposed to happen. A CO host tried again to de-escalate, suggesting they take a quick break. Jenna pushed forward instead. She asked Snoop directly if he regretted any of the comments he'd made about younger artists. Given the backlash, the controversy, would he take any of it back, rephrase it, clarify? His answer came instantly, no. He said regret would imply he'd done something wrong. Speaking honestly about the state of his culture wasn't wrong. Net was necessary. If more people in positions like his spoke up instead of worrying about being canceled or losing popularity, maybe the culture wouldn't be where it is now. Jenna pressed again. Was public criticism really the right approach? Going on podcasts and making sweeping statements about an entire generation, was that about protecting hip-hop or about generating headlines? In the age of social media, she said, perception matters, and if his public image was coming across as bitter, that was so. Anything he needed to confront. Snoop's patience thinned. He told her he wasn't a brand manager, he was a human being. He was going to speak his mind, whether it was palatable or not. The expectation that artists sanitize their opinions to avoid offending people, he said, is exactly what's broken in the industry. Authenticity used to matter, now everything is performance. Jenna countered that his legacy was being written in real time by how he treated the next generation. That plenty of legends had damaged their reputations, late in their careers by refusing to adapt or by alienating younger artists. She said he was at a crossroads. He could be a bridge or he could be a barrier. Snoop held her gaze. Then he smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who had just made up his mind. He thanked her for her concern about his legacy, but said he didn't need career. Advice from someone who fundamentally misunderstood what he stood for. This interview, he said, had made one thing clear. There was no productive conversation left to have. He thanked Jenna for having him on the words. Heavy, with sarcasm, then nodded to the CO hosts, telling them it was good to see them. Before turning to leave, he looked back at Jenna one last time. He said he'd been in this industry long enough to recognize when someone was more interested in creating headlines than having an honest exchange. T wasn't going to participate in whatever this had turned into. Jenna's expression shifted from combative to concerned. She tried to soften it, saying they were just having a discussion. Disagreement is healthy, she said. Compelling television thrives on debates like this. She asked him to sit back down so they could finish the conversation properly. But Snoop was already unclipping his microphone. Calling it a discussion, he said, was generous. From the moment he sat down, she'd come at him sideways. He'd given her multiple chances to actually engage with what he was saying, instead of trying to score points, but she'd chosen to keep pushing. That was her choice. Walking away was his. Soho stood trying to reason with him. They apologized if things had gone too far, suggested everyone take a breath, they reminded him. The audience was invested, and that leaving now would only create more controversy. Snoop looked at them with something